Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to jump right into some late-breaking news out of the Middle East today.
Ooh,
I
that
know,
big stuff.
yeah, big stuff. I know you all are probably pretty familiar with the conflicts that have been going on in the region, but this one is a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
A potential permanent ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon.
Ah,
So we're
wow.
going to unpack all the details and figure out what this could mean for the region. So
Let's get into it.
let's dive in.
Yeah, the timing of this ceasefire is really interesting. We're talking about a deal that was just brokered by France and the United States.
Right.
And, in the middle of some of the most intense fighting that we've seen just hours ago, President Biden announced this permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah set to begin at 4:00 a.m. tomorrow, local time.
Wow, so that is incredibly fast-moving. It
Yeah.
sounds like they're really trying to put a stop to this conflict.
Yeah.
So can you walk me through this? What does permanent actually look like on the ground? What are the terms of the deal?
Sure. So the immediate impact is going to be a halt to the fighting across that Lebanese-Israeli border. But it's not just about stopping the violence. It's about trying to create this framework for a lasting peace. So over the next 60 days, the Lebanese army is going to deploy and take control over their territory, while Israel gradually withdraws its remaining forces.
Okay.
So it's a very careful, phased approach, trying to de-escalate the situation.
Okay, so a step-by-step process trying to,
Right.
build some trust back.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's not forget about the people who've been caught in the middle of all of this.
Of course.
What does this ceasefire mean for them?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the human cost of this conflict has been devastating. Civilians on both sides have endured just unimaginable hardship, and the ceasefire offers at least a glimmer of hope. It means the possibility of finally returning home, the chance to rebuild their lives, their communities, their businesses. It's a chance to heal and move forward.
Yeah, I can only imagine the relief they must be feeling right now.
Mm.
It's a powerful reminder that these conflicts aren't just about politics and territory. They're about real people's lives.
Absolutely.
Now, we've heard President Biden's statement. He was very strong, saying that this is designed to be permanent.
Yeah.
Hezbollah will not be allowed to threaten Israel's security again. But what about the other side? How has Netanyahu reacted to this deal?
Well, Netanyahu has publicly stated his support for the ceasefire, but he's framing it within his broader goals. So, eliminating Hamas, getting the hostages back, and bringing the Israeli residents in the north back home.
Right.
So it makes you wonder if a ceasefire could actually help him achieve these objectives.
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle. It makes you wonder if this is just about, stopping the fighting
Uh-huh.
or if there's a larger political strategy at play here. And, we talked about, you mentioned the U.S. and France brokering this deal, but it sounds like the U.S.'s role in enforcing it will be very hands-off.
Mm.
Biden specifically said that they will not be sending troops to Lebanon, so how will they ensure that this actually sticks?
Right. Well, that's a crucial question. The U.S., along with France and other partners, will be providing assistance to Lebanon, but their focus seems to be on bolstering the Lebanese army and the state security forces, not really direct military intervention.
Right.
So we're talking financial aid, diplomatic pressure, maybe even intelligence, sharing a very different approach from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a shift in U.S. strategy in the region. It makes you want to understand the deeper context here. To really grasp the weight of this ceasefire,
For sure.
we need to understand how we even got here.
Right.
What were the events that triggered this conflict in the first place?
Well, the roots of this particular conflict go back to October of 2023, when Israel launched that retaliatory campaign in Gaza after that Hamas terror attack.
Yeah.
Hezbollah, driven by solidarity with the Palestinians, got involved, and things just spiraled from there. And Israel, of course, justified their actions as self-defense.
Right, so this chain reaction of violence essentially plunged the region back into conflict. But we've seen, tensions flare up between Israel and Lebanon before, haven't we?
We have.
I mean, what made this time different? Why did it escalate so dramatically?
Yeah, this isn't the first time these two sides have clashed, but this time the situation just took a much more serious turn over the summer of 2024. Israel really significantly ramped up their airstrikes. And in a major blow to Hezbollah, their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in late September. And then on October 1st, Israel launched a full-scale ground invasion.
Wow, those are some major turning points.
Yeah.
Nasrallah's death must have been a huge shock, and then the ground invasion on top of that, things must have felt incredibly volatile at that point.
Absolutely. Nasrallah's death created this power vacuum within Hezbollah, and the ground invasion just significantly escalated the fighting. But here's where it gets even more complex. Even while the ceasefire was being negotiated, the attacks continued. Israel conducted what they called extensive strikes on Hezbollah targets in Beirut, and Hezbollah retaliated with missile strikes on an Israeli infantry training camp. So it's
Oh.
almost paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah,
Why keep fighting when you're trying to make peace?
that is a good question. It seems like both sides were trying to, get in one last punch before the bell rings.
Right.
Almost like they were trying to gain some kind of upper hand before the ceasefire takes effect.
Exactly. And it's a fascinating insight into the strategic calculations and the deep mistrust that still exists between these two sides.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if those final acts of aggression will cast a shadow over this ceasefire or if both sides can truly move past them and commit to peace.
Yeah, it really does make you think about, just how fragile this whole situation is, even with the ceasefire in place, that potential for renewed conflict. I
Yeah.
mean, it's still there. It's like trying to build a house on, shaky ground. You might get the walls up,
Right.
but one good tremor and the whole thing could come crashing down. So do you see this ceasefire as a genuine step towards lasting peace? Or is this just, kind of a temporary pause before the fighting inevitably starts up again?
Yeah, I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's just way too early to say for sure. There's a lot of hope riding on this agreement, both within the region and internationally. There was immense pressure from the EU and other global players to get both sides to the negotiating table.
Sure.
But hope alone isn't going to be enough. We need to look at the bigger picture here, understand the underlying dynamics that have fueled this conflict for so long.
Right. Okay, so let's say for a moment that this ceasefire does hold. What would that mean for the region as a whole? Could this have some kind of ripple effect, encouraging other parties in these long-standing conflicts to maybe seek out some peaceful resolutions?
I mean, that's certainly the best case scenario, right?
Yeah.
And it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility. I mean, imagine if this ceasefire actually became a model for de-escalation. A demonstration that even deeply entrenched adversaries can find a way to coexist.
Right.
It could inspire renewed diplomatic efforts, not just between Israel and Lebanon, but throughout the Middle East. I mean, think about the potential here, reduced tensions, increased cooperation, maybe even some progress on some of those seemingly intractable issues that have divided the region for decades.
Yeah, it's a very tantalizing thought to think about, a future where diplomacy and dialogue replace all the violence and mistrust.
Yeah.
But, I got to play devil's advocate here. What if this ceasefire is just a temporary lull? What if it's just a chance for both sides to kind of, regroup, rearm, and prepare for the next round of fighting? I mean, we've seen that happen before, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, sadly, history is just full of examples of ceasefires that, that just fail to translate into lasting peace. And even if the guns do fall silent, those underlying issues, the territorial disputes, the political ideologies, the historical grievances, I mean, those don't just vanish overnight.
So how do we break that cycle then? What would it take to actually create a sustainable peace, one that goes beyond just, stopping the fighting?
It's a complex challenge, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with a genuine commitment to dialogue, a willingness to truly listen to the other side's perspectives and to acknowledge their pain, their fears.
Right.
And it also requires a willingness to compromise, to recognize that, a lasting peace may not fully satisfy everyone's demands.
So it sounds like it would require a fundamental shift in mindset,
Mm.
a move away from this kind of zero-sum game that's characterized so many conflicts in the region.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true peace is not about victory or defeat. It's about finding a way to live together, to coexist, to build a shared future.
And that's a long and difficult process, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something that just happens overnight.
No, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes a tremendous amount of effort and goodwill from all sides. And frankly, it requires a willingness to forgive, to let go of those past hurts and move forward with a sense of shared purpose.
It's a tall order for
Sure.
sure. But if this ceasefire does hold, it could be the first step on that long road to reconciliation.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, the long-term implications of this ceasefire.
Right.
But let's zoom in a little bit, focus on the here and now.
Sure.
This agreement is set to take effect in just a few hours.
Right.
What should we be watching for in the coming days and weeks?
Oh.
What are the signs that this is truly holding, or, are we headed back towards conflict?
Well, the most immediate thing to watch is whether both sides actually follow through on their commitments.
Yeah.
Will Israel actually withdraw their troops as promised? Will the Lebanese army be able to effectively take control of their territory?
So it's all about, actions speaking louder than words at this point.
Yeah.
We need to see concrete evidence that both sides are serious about honoring this agreement. Absolutely. And, beyond just the military aspects, We also need to pay close attention to the rhetoric that's coming from both sides. Are their leaders using language that promotes reconciliation and de-escalation, or are they still, kind of fanning the flames of hostility and mistrust?
Right. So it's about looking beyond just the official statements and trying to gauge what the real sentiment is on the ground.
Hmm.
Are people feeling hopeful? Are they cautiously optimistic? Or are they still bracing for the worst?
Exactly. And we also need to be aware of those potential spoilers both within the region and internationally.
Yeah.
Are there groups or individuals who have a vested interest in seeing this ceasefire fail? Are there external forces that are trying to undermine the peace process? I mean, these are all factors that could derail even the most well-intentioned agreement.
It feels like we're at a very critical juncture, a moment of great uncertainty, but also immense possibility. It's hard to know what the future holds, but I think the next few weeks will be very crucial in determining the fate of this ceasefire.
You're right, the stakes are incredibly high. And while we should remain cautiously optimistic, we also need to be realistic. This is a fragile peace, one that will require constant vigilance and a commitment from all sides to make it work.
Okay, so we've covered the political and military dimensions of this ceasefire, and we've explored, the potential outcomes,
Right.
both hopeful and cautious. But there's another layer we need to consider, one that often gets overlooked in these discussions, and that's the economic angle.
That's a great point. Wars are expensive, not just in terms of human life, but, in terms of their impact on economies.
Exactly. So let's talk about that.
Mm.
How has this conflict impacted the economies of Israel and Lebanon, and what could this ceasefire mean for their economic prospects moving forward?
Well, on the Lebanese side, the situation is particularly dire. I mean, they were already in the midst of a severe economic crisis before this conflict even erupted. And the fighting has just made things that much worse. It's disrupted trade, it's disrupted tourism investment, pushing even more people into poverty.
So for Lebanon, this conflict has been a double whammy, just adding another layer of suffering to an already struggling population.
Precisely. And while Israel's economy is definitely more robust, the conflict has still taken its toll. The constant threat of attacks, the mobilization of troops, the disruption to daily life. I mean, all of these things have economic consequences.
It makes you wonder if maybe those economic pressures actually played a role in both sides' decisions to, pursue a ceasefire. Could it be that they just simply couldn't afford to keep fighting?
Yeah, it's certainly a factor worth considering. I mean, wars are incredibly costly, both financially and in terms of, human capital. And a prolonged conflict would have just continued to drain the resources of both countries, potentially leading to even greater instability.
So, in a sense, this ceasefire could be seen as kind of an economic lifeline, particularly for Lebanon.
I think that's a good way to put it. If the ceasefire holds, it could open the door for international aid and investment, which Lebanon desperately needs to rebuild its infrastructure and get its economy back on track.
But that's a big if, right? If the fighting resumes, or if there's just this lack of trust and cooperation, those economic benefits, they might never materialize.
Absolutely. The economic recovery of both countries is intricately linked to the success of this ceasefire. If it fails, the consequences could be devastating not just for Israel and Lebanon, but for the entire region.
It's a stark reminder that peace and prosperity go hand in hand. Conflict creates instability, which undermines economic growth and development.
And conversely, economic stability can create a much more conducive environment for peace. When people have jobs, when they can provide for their families, when they feel a sense of hope for the future, they're much less likely to resort to violence.
It's a virtuous cycle. Peace fosters economic growth, which in turn, reinforces peace.
Mm.
So this ceasefire, if it holds, could be the key to unlocking that cycle both for Israel and for Lebanon.
Exactly. It has the potential to be transformative, not just in terms of ending the fighting, but in terms of actually laying the foundation for a more prosperous and stable future for both countries.
Yeah, it's a glimmer of hope amidst all the uncertainty, a chance to break free from this cycle of violence and create a new narrative for the region.
Right. But it's important to remember that this is just the beginning. The hard work of rebuilding trust, adjusting grievances, and fostering cooperation, that all lies ahead.
Well said. And that brings us back to you, our listener. We've taken you on this deep dive into this historic ceasefire agreement, exploring the history, the key players, the terms of the deal, the potential outcomes. But this is a story that is still being written, it's unfolding in real time, and its ultimate outcome remains uncertain.
So we encourage you to stay engaged, to continue learning to form your own opinions, and to be a part of the conversation.
Because the future of this region, and indeed the world, depends on informed and engaged citizens like you.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What does this ceasefire mean for the wider Middle East?
Mm.
Could it spark a broader wave of peace and reconciliation? Or will it simply be a fleeting moment of calm before the storm returns? The answer in many ways is up to us.
Yeah, it's a powerful thought, isn't it? That the choices we make, the actions we take, can shape the course of history.
It is a lot of responsibility,
Yeah.
but also incredibly empowering. It means we're not just passive bystanders. We can actually be agents of change.
Right.
But where do we even begin?
Right.
How can we as individuals make a difference in such a complex and volatile situation?
That's a question a lot of people ask, and it's an important one. There's no, easy answer, no magic formula.
Right.
But I think it starts with staying informed, engaging with diverse perspectives,
Mhm.
challenging our own assumptions and biases.
Right.
It means seeking out those reliable sources of information, listening to people who have different experiences and viewpoints, and, just being willing to have these tough conversations.
So it's about being proactive,
Yes.
about educating ourselves and
Right.
refusing to just accept those simplistic narratives or easy answers.
Exactly. And beyond that, I think it's about finding ways to actually support the peace process,
Mhm.
whether that's through donating to organizations that are working on the ground, advocating for policies that promote dialogue and reconciliation, or just, spreading that message of peace and understanding within our own communities.
So it's about taking that awareness
Right.
and turning it into action, however small or seemingly insignificant it might seem.
Mm-hmm.
Because even those small acts, when they're multiplied by thousands, by millions, they can have that ripple effect,
Yeah,
creating a more peaceful and just world.
absolutely. And remember, this journey towards peace, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. There will be
Uh-huh.
setbacks. Yeah. There will be moments of doubt and despair, but we can't afford to give up hope. Gotta keep pushing forward, keep striving for a better future for ourselves, for our children, and for the generations to come.
It's a good reminder that peace is not a destination.
Right.
It's a process. It's this continuous ongoing effort that requires our unwavering commitment and our collective action. And, even though this specific ceasefire is focused on Israel and Lebanon, the lessons we learn from it, the choices we make in response to it, those have implications that extend far beyond the borders of those two countries.
You're so right. What happens in the Middle East affects us all, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
It impacts global security, it influences economic trends, it shapes political discourse, so we can't afford to ignore it, dismiss it as someone else's problem. We have a stake in the outcome, and we have a responsibility to engage.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What does this ceasefire mean for the wider Middle East? Could it be the catalyst for a wider wave of peace and reconciliation, or will it simply be a fleeting moment of calm before the storm returns?
The answer to that question lies not just with the leaders involved, but with each and every one of us. The choices we make, the actions we take will ultimately determine the course of history. So choose wisely, choose peace, choose hope, choose a better future for all.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and be sure to tune in next time.